Hey friends, it's Jasmine, and I hope that you all have been doing well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I am a witchy content creator here on YouTube and several other platforms, so feel free to check out my description bar down below to keep up with me elsewhere if you would like to. If you are a returning subscriber, it's good to see you back. Welcome back, and let's get into today's video. I want to do something completely different than I have done on my channel before, and I might continue to do these sort of videos every so often should you guys enjoy them. So if you end up liking this video, make sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below letting me know if you enjoyed this. We want to talk about Pyewacket, the movie. Okay, and I want to do a little bit of a review, but this is mostly going to be like a deep dive and a commentary style video. This is probably going to be a longer video. I do have some notes here to help me kind of like stay on track, and I will also be linking my notes down below in the description bar if you would like to take a look at those. So go ahead and take this time now to grab yourself a drink and a snack, and let's get into it. I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer here, and that is that this video is going to contain spoilers. This is going to be your only warning that if you do not want to hear spoilers, go ahead and click off of this video now and come back to me after you've watched the video. Like I said, this is going to be somewhat of a review of the movie, but also a lot of commentary. And kind of what inspired me to sort of take this take, if you will, on this is I see a lot of like spiritual folk on YouTube, and I see a lot of people from the Abrahamic variety providing their commentary from their own religion's perspective and background on folk horror movies or occult movies. And the thing is, for those of you who might not know, I am a practicing witch. I also serve our coven, functioning as a high priestess, facilitating a handful and more of open and closed rituals for our coven and community every year. Not only am I a practicing witch, but I'm also a witch of a left-hand path variety. If you aren't familiar with the left-hand path is, I did a full video on that, and I will also link that below in the description bar should you be interested to learn more about the left-hand path. I'm a witch that is not afraid to weave malefically, and I am a witch that also works with demons and the infernal. So I think that my perspective on folk horror movies and the occult sort of haunting movies in general can provide a really nuanced perspective to the conversation that I'm just not really seeing a whole lot here on YouTube. Witches such as myself are very much everyday people, and I think sometimes that gets lost. And I think sometimes that gets like fantastified, if you know what I mean. Also, really quick before we start, get into these nails. Get into these nails. I have an affiliate code down below with a link in the description also if you are interested in getting your own bewitching set from Loveful Nails. Okay, so let's talk about Pyewacket. So this is the synopsis of the movie Pyewacket. A frustrated, angst-ridden teenage girl awakens something in the woods when she naively performs an occult ritual to evoke a witch to kill her mother. The release date for this movie was March 23rd, 2018, and the director is Adam McDonald. Now, as far as ratings go for this movie, it's kind of in like the mid-range territory. Rotten Tomatoes has it as a 51% score, and IMDb has it as a 5.8 out of 10. From what I've gathered from listening to other people who have reviewed this video and critics, it sounds like this movie was a little bit of a like lower budget style movie, so keep that in mind if you do check it out. However, that didn't bother me whatsoever. I mean, I'm a child of the Blair Witch era, and that movie was and still is iconic. So I don't think that a low budget necessarily always translates to a shitty movie. Again, I'm going to be reading you some of my notes that I took during the movie and that I've thought about in reflection afterwards. So if you see me looking down, that's me looking down at my notes. I do also want to say that if you enjoyed the movie Backcountry, or if you enjoyed the movie The Witch, the same people who worked on those movies worked on this movie. Also, before we get started, I think it's only fair to give a trigger warning as well. This movie does include some self-hurting behavior. It also includes some themes of like PTSD, the death and loss of a parent, substance abuse, alcoholism, and like mother-daughter trauma issues. So if those are things that tend to upset you, just know going in that those are elements in the movie, and so you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. I have also linked the movie trailer down below in the description. I don't know if I can really play this or not due to like copyright reasons. So if you're interested in watching the trailer, check out my description bar. There's going to be a lot of information down there, so don't sleep on it. Also, if you're interested in a spoiler-free review of this movie to watch before you watch the movie and before you come back here to me, I have also linked a spoiler-free movie review. The main character of this movie is Leah, who is very much an angsty teenage girl, and there were parts of this movie that like I found myself relating to her, and there were other parts of this movie that I was just kind of like low-key cringing because it's just so stereotypical. But I also feel like I kind of was Leah when I was a teenage girl. Dealing with troubles at home and substance abuse and trauma and mental health stuff is not unfamiliar to me. Very much like Leah, I also got a large draw and interest in the occult when I was a teenager. And I was definitely the sort of teenage witch that
fucked around and found out.
However, that being said, I do want to point out that in the opening of the movie, and then also later in the movie, there is a chant that is used to evoke the spirit.
As I charge you with this sign, Mother and the night are mine. I invite you to come. Pyewacket.
Again, I'm not going to read the full chant to you. It is going to be in my notes in the description if you would like to read the whole thing. The reason why I'm touching on this evocation that is included in this movie is because there are two lines here specifically that I do think are a little bit reckless. Now keep in mind, Leah is supposed to be an angsty, reactive teenage girl. So I'm not shaming the character for her reaction, but I do kind of want to err on the side of caution when it comes to arts of sorcery and spirit work, because this is truly not all love and light here. And if there's one thing that I do think that some of the Abrahamic commenters or the spiritual folk and commenters here on YouTube really do have right, is that they know that there are things in the occult that do indeed wish you harm. Like,
this is not all unicorns and rainbows.
There are two lines in her evocation that I think personally just kind of are unnecessary. He tells the spirit, "Hear me with my ears and speak with my tongue. I invite you to come. I invite you to come." Okay, now this whole entire evocation is also very much inspired, in my opinion. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I did see this in another commentator's video as well, from the Gardnerian Book of Shadows verse charge. A lot of very similar elements there. I also have that linked in my notes if you would like to cross compare the two evocations. Problem with this is in the movie, Leah has never summoned a spirit before. Leah has never done a ritual of this nature before. So maybe in your first ritual, don't give a spirit full permission to use your tongue and your ears and your eyes, and allow it basically full rights over your body. Again, I'm all here for fucking around and finding out. When we make mistakes sometimes, that's the best way that we can learn. But this is a mistake that is very easy to avoid making. I also want to point out that going into the woods and summoning a spirit is not unknown to traditional witchcraft. In fact, it's a pretty big part of our practice. So that's not super ooky and weird and scary. A lot of times these spirit packs can look very much like business deals in the sense that you are going to request a spirit to do X, and in turn, you are going to pay the spirit in the form of something, right? Now, there always should be divination done prior to any magical working, and there should also be divination done to understand what that payment for the service the spirit is providing you is going to be, to ensure that you can indeed actually cash that check. Kind of like that old saying goes, don't let your mouth write a check that your wallet can't cash. So that was kind of like my first sort of hot take about this already going into the beginning of the film is, girl, what the fuck are we doing? So let's take a look at Pyewacket and the history and lore surrounding this particular entity that is featured in this movie. Is Pyewacket actually like a real spirit? Well, Pyewacket was one of the supposed familiar spirits of an alleged witch accused by the claimed witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins in March of 1644 in the town of Manningtree, Essex, England. And Pyewacket was just one of 9 alleged witches' familiars. For those of you that might not be familiar with the term familiar, let me break this down for you a little bit as well. A familiar in Western demonology is a small animal or imp kept as a witch's attendant, given to her typically by the devil or inherited by another witch. The familiar is typically a low-ranking demon that assumed any animal shape, such as a toad, dog, insect, or black cat, or other animals. And that's from the Britannica.com. So when we are looking at a witch's familiar, we're basically talking about an ally or a friend of witches. And different witches are likely going to have 1, 2, or a handful of familiars. It's not going to be necessarily just one, and those familiars are not even going to be the same across the board. But I will say that the 9 familiars that were sort of detailed by Matthew Hopkins are considered to be sort of these iconic witch allies. So another thing that seemed kind of off to me about this is if Leah is supposed to be a witch and a practitioner, why would Pyewacket be a villain if our familiars are our friends? And I know maybe what some of you are thinking, that us witches are just completely beguiled by Satan and all of this is, you know, just pulling wool over our eyes and we're in over our heads and we're damning our souls. But that is not the case. I have had very good dealings with my familiars. If you are interested in learning more about the sick and twisted Matthew Hopkins, who essentially is responsible for several hundred murders, I am going to link some informational videos down below in the description again. I'm not going to spend too much time really focusing on him because he's pretty irrelevant to the movie, and I don't even remember if he's really touched on that much in the movie. I think that there's a point where she's looking at a grimoire and there is some art from that era. It's a wood cutting that is featured in the movie, but it's mostly just kind of like glossed over. And Pyewacket in the movie is just referred to as a demon or a dark spirit. Pyewacket is not really mentioned as a witch's familiar. I suppose that's because it would kind of throw a wrench in the whole plot if Pyewacket was actually going to be cast as Leah's ally. The movie starts off where Leah is going to a book signing. There's an author in her town that has released the book called The Occult Primer, which is a fictional book that's here in the plot. But she goes to go meet the author and she's like super excited to get this book signed. She tells the author that if she had one wish about the book, she wished that he would have written more about the rituals. And he decides to tell her that, you know, this magic is really heavy and ooky spooky, and he has to be careful and sort of gatekeep some of the information because it could fall into the wrong hands. So we have a little bit of foreshadowing there already. In the beginning of the movie, it really highlights that the mom clearly has some substance use issues and is drinking a lot. And also, the mother's husband, Leah's father, recently did pass away. And so it's really been a hard go for the family. Mother is grieving the loss of her husband. So it's not necessarily like she's just abusing alcohol because she's bored. I mean, she's heartbroken, and at one point in the movie even talks to Leah about how she doesn't want to even be here in the physical realm anymore. That is how mentally and spiritually unwell she is. She ends up also telling Leah that in order for her to take care of her mental health and thus basically hold it down for her and Leah, they need to move out of their family house that Leah has grown up in. The mother feels like she can't heal and move on with living in the same town that she lost her husband in and built this wonderful life and has all these memories in, which of course causes a little bit of friction with her teenage daughter who's in high school, who now just lost her father and is now going to have her entire life completely uprooted from everything that she's ever known. As you can imagine, there's quite a bit of tension between the mother and the daughter there, and Leah ends up running up to her room and having a whole teenage sort of meltdown and flipping through some of the books on her bookshelf, which the books are pretty interesting. Some of these I've heard from other commentators are actually fictional, like the Wicca Wicca Witch. I haven't done a whole lot of deep diving about these books, but I did find it interesting that we have the Lesser Key of Solomon in her collection. We also have a book on Hecate in her collection. Hecate being a quote unquote dark goddess and a queen of witches and a teacher of the craft. A gatekeeper to other worlds and other realms. The mother ends up buying a house 2 hours away, far out of the city, and of course, deep in the woods, because what folk horror movie would not include the woods? There's absolutely an undeniable magic involved with the liminal space of forests and spaces where they have not been completely developed. The wildness there. As soon as Leah gets to the new property and she steps out of the car, she's surrounded by wilderness. And the cinematography here is really good. Even though this movie is considered lower budget, I thought that the cinematography was really good because it captures how Leah is feeling in this moment, and also that there very much is a sense of otherness about this area. There is something there in these woods that Leah can already sense and feel. Also, Leah is a city girl. Like, she grew up in town, so moving 2.5 hours out of town was probably also really scary and maybe frustrating for her. And she clearly was holding a lot of resentment against her mother, not only for uprooting her, but also just her mother's behavior with her substance use and her mental health. And there's just clearly a lot of friction. In the process of her moving to this new property with her mother also offers her, after an argument, that she will drive her to and from school, offering to keep Leah in the same school district at least until the end of the school year. That way she doesn't have to be uprooted in the middle of the school year. Now, I want to point out something about Leah's friends. I find this to be rather stereotypical when it comes to witchy movies, but of course they're very like punk rock and alternative sort of kids. It kind of gave me like a modern day feeling of The Craft in a way. And I honestly chuckled when I saw Leah's crush, who I forget his name, but on his denim jacket, he literally has a Black Craft Cult logo on his jacket, which like felt insane, brother. So this video is not sponsored in any way. And for those of you who are going to twist my words, know that Black Craft Cult is a clothing company, okay? Chill out, chill out. Leah eventually ends up getting into another fight with her mom. And during this fight, her mother tells her how much she hates that her daughter reminds her of her father and that her daughter has her father's face, and her mother just wants to claw it off of her. She is clearly not well and not mentally stable, and is lashing out at her daughter, who is also grieving at this time. Her mother also criticizes her, telling her that ever since her father passed, she's been hanging out with these losers and into all of this dumb occult shit. Leah then basically has a complete and utter break in her psyche and is frustrated with her mother and is crying out to her mother to try to get her mother to see her side and understand her. And she's telling her mother that the occult and witchery is actually bringing her a lot of comfort and is really the only thing that brings her joy in her life, and also defends her friends and tells her mother that they're not losers. She then basically ends up thudding and thumping her way up to her room upstairs and slamming the door, and ends up cursing her mother out, wishing unaliving upon her, and a bit of a fit of teenage rage. However, then she goes to the Occult Primer book, which is the book that she got signed at the book signing party from that author, and she opens it up, and then she also, I'm assuming, pulls out what looks to be a book of shadows. I'm gonna break this down too. I feel like a lot of you who watch my channel probably already know this, but for those of you who might not, a book of shadows is sort of like a witch's scrapbook that shadows their practice. So we record our experiences, our dreams, our rituals, our spells in this book. It's something that most witches keep very personal to them. Some witches might even pass it on to coven mates or children should something happen. And it's a very iconic part of a witch's practice. So I'm assuming that in this image here, that was her book of shadows. Which I also want to say that when it comes to the witch's pyramid of to know, to will, to dare, to keep silent, I stand a first pillar witchy girly, okay? The first pillar is to know yourself, to know your craft. And I feel like Leah is trying to work on her first pillar here. Clearly she's building her own occult library with those books that we saw earlier. And she is writing stuff down and copying it from other books to then put into her book of shadows. However, when it comes to things in the occult and when it comes to working with demons, okay, or really any other spirits, you want to do as much research as you can. You don't really just want to go in completely blind. You would not leave your front door unlocked and just invite anyone and everyone to come up into your house. That just doesn't make sense. Spirits, very much like people, can be good and bad, and anything in between. Also, spirits, very much like people, who I might rock with, you might find them to be annoying, and vice versa. Not every spirit is going to be for every witch. Hey y'all, so I'm editing this video right now, and I just want to make this point too. When it comes to spirit work, summoning spirits, it's actually a lot like making a phone call. I might know your phone number, and I might call you. But that doesn't mean that you're going to answer the phone, right? So spirit conjuration is a lot like making a phone call. Sometimes they might not pick up. Sometimes they might pick up. The same theory applies to this. So after she copies that down from the book, she then grabs her sage and some red thread and some of her mother's hair. I don't really know what she thought she was going to do with some California white sage when it comes to summoning a demon. That to me felt like it was just kind of thrown in there because Hollywood just felt like it fit. White sage is really not used for that, and if anything, that's kind of a tricky cultural spot when it comes to things that, should witches really be using California white sage? I think that's a whole other topic. However, the red thread is extremely iconic in traditional witchcraft. Witches have always been adaptable to their surroundings and have always used what they have on hand, especially when it comes to folk witchery. So things like thread, a very common everyday item, is a perfect witch's tool. The red thread specifically is iconic because red represents blood and the thread represents the umbilical cord or the connection that a witch has to the powers of the craft and to the spirits of the craft. Any and all threads can definitely be used, but red thread is pretty traditional. I do want to point out something that happens next. When she was copying a page down from the occult primer, it looks to be like a page from the Lesser Key of Solomon. It looks to be actually like a summoning sigil for the demon Ashtaroth. Very much a demon sigil, aka Ashtaroth from the Lesser Key of Solomon. Ashtaroth is thought to be a Duke of Hell, and also I think it's important to point out that Ashtaroth formerly, before the Abrahamic religions just kind of demonized and bastardized all of the gods of the Fertile Crescent, was actually sort of like a mother goddess, fertility goddess, fishing goddess-like archetype. And some witches will often call out to her as Astarte, or in her male form and demonized form as Ashtaroth, as sort of a gatekeeper and pathfinder-like spirit when working with other infernals. Because Astarte is this mother goddess of the Fertile Crescent, and there is an association there with witches, and she also has ties to Ishtar and to Aphrodite and to the White Goddess, she's popular for witches to work with that are getting into working with infernals. So I've seen some other commentators on here sort of be kind of confused, like, why is Ashtaroth in here? That's kind of my take. Maybe she was planning on working with Astarte Ashtaroth as a way to sort of protect and guide her in this work, since she is associated with sort of protecting witches and pathfinding. It's really not uncommon for witches who have never worked with a demon to call on Ashtaroth first and sort of kind of be a middleman or a guide in that meeting, just to ensure that all things go smoothly and no one gets hurt in the process. Again, these are things that a well-learned and well-studied witch would know. Another tidbit that I find to be kind of fun about the Ashtaroth Astarte lore is that allegedly after the fall, when a lot of the gods of the Fertile Crescent were then basically either consumed in to be angelic or pushed down to be infernal, Astarte was given a second form by Lucifer, which then became her male form. And so there's also very much like a queer element here and like a gender bendy element here as well, that I think fits in with like the teenage narrative of self-discovery and trying to understand who you are and what you want to do with your life and who we're becoming. So she basically packs up all of that stuff, the sage, the red thread, her mother's hair, which we call that a tag lock, by the way, and it's used in sympathetic magic. A tag lock could be dirt that someone walked over, like collecting their footprints. It could be some of their hair. It could be a cigarette butt that they threw out. It could be nail clippings. It could be a mirage of things, okay? But a tag lock then connects the spell sympathetically to the target. And just the fact that she's getting a tag lock of her mother to use in some witchery tells me how truly unstable and also mentally unwell Leah is, that she is going all the way 0 to 60 like that. She also grabs a silver bowl from the kitchen and some milk, which milk and honey are pretty traditional offerings to nature spirits. So I thought that that was kind of a fun inclusion from a witch's perspective, right? Like that would be something that you might offer a spirit of the land should you enter into a pact or bargain with them. And possibly every full moon, you would then feed them with your blood, milk, or honey. That's not uncommon, pretty traditional. But also, girl, what the actual are you doing? In this next scene, speaking of traditional elements in this movie, she goes out into the woods and she finds a secluded area that she feels called to, which is very much something that us real life, mundane, everyday witches do when we are going out to do rituals in the woods. It's called listening to the whispers of the witch's council, trusting them to lead and guide you to where you are meant to be in the wild wood. She then takes a rock near a tree and then begins to knock on wood, which there's that old saying, right? Knock on wood. A way to sort of make a bargain with nature spirits or spirits of the land in order to not jinx yourself is how many of us use it today. I'm sure you've encountered a situation where someone has said, oh, you better knock on wood in order to prevent the opposite from what you said happening, or in order to prevent the negativity falling upon you. Looking at traditional witchcraft elements found within this film, offerings of milk and knocking on wood are very much pointing again to Pyewacket being a sort of nature spirit, not a demon. Milk is not necessarily something that's commonly given to demons. However, I won't speak for all of them. I'm sure that there are some demons that would enjoy a nice cold glass of milk. So now in this scene, she is doing the working that is heard at the very beginning of the movie. I also found it kind of funny that she had a heartagram on her backpack. Like, of course she would listen to that style of music. She's an edgy, angsty teenager. And anytime there's a sort of teenage witch in a movie, they always have to be really edgy and like a Billy badass. And I just find that to be hilariously stereotypical, but also I'm kind of laughing at myself because that was and still is me. In the next scene, she then begins to take some of the red thread and she's actually forming a pentagram by wrapping it around the trees, which I just thought that that was absolutely brilliant. In a lot of work involving infernals, it's not uncommon to summon a spirit into a shape, like a triangle, and for the caster or the magician to stand within a protective circle. It's also not uncommon to stand within a pentagram, a 5-pointed star, in order to work magic as well, as you have the connection and correspondence with the 3 realms and also all 5 elements of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. The upper world, mid-world, other world, lower world. After she wraps her pentagram and thread around the trees, she then stands in the middle of it and starts carving a star into the dirt using her athame. An athame is a traditional witch's ceremonial blade. However, usually athames aren't actually used to cut physical things like this. That would be more like a bowline. Athame is sometimes used similar to how you would imagine a wand being used to cut, send, and direct energy. Again, she's saying that evocation where she's literally summoning a spirit she's never met, never worked with before, is completely unfamiliar with, to come to her and possess her flesh, see with her eyes, speak with her tongue, and hear with her ears. Girl, you can't be doing this all willy-nilly. Like, what is wrong with you? After doing that, she anoints herself on her temples and her third eye and on her wrists with oil, which is something that is used ritualistically. And when she does this, you begin to hear a crow sort of cawing in the distance. The cinematography here is beautiful, and the symbolism of the crow being attached to spirits and messages and the afterlife and the liminal and witchery is something that I noticed. She then begins to put a mixture of herbs in the milk, and I'm not really sure what the herbs were. I don't know if they really showed it. I don't know if she crumbled up some of her California white sage and put it in the milk. I don't know if she put a little salt and pepper. I don't know what she's doing, putting herbs in the milk, but she put some herbs in the milk inside of the silver bowl and beckoning Pyewacket, calling the spirit by name to come aid her and attend her. Okay, the next scene, a little bit of a trigger warning. Earlier, I talked about how there were some themes of self-harm in this, and this is some of where that kind of comes into play. I do want to point out that blood magic used in ceremony is very common. Some traditions do animal unaliving, okay? Not all, but some do. And that's often kind of viewed in a very sacred way where the animal is well taken care of, prayed over, blessed, and then consumed by the community and parts of it given to a deity or a spirit. It's really not usually as sinister as I feel like folks in the West have really made it out to be. I don't really see how that's much different than like a hog roast. Or she's not doing that to an animal in this scene. Instead, she takes her athame, which again traditionally would not be used in this way at all, because an athame is used for cutting, sending, and directing energy, not actually cutting physical things. Would be where the shelg or the red blade would come in, because it's used in blood rites and blood consecrations. Oftentimes in modern days, you just prick your finger and one little drop is more than enough. Blood is extremely powerful in witchcraft. It holds our red soul. It holds the memories and the footprints and of our ancestors and our DNA. It is such a powerful tag lock, if not probably the most powerful tag lock. Life force energy, and blood also has a very permanent sort of correspondence to it. Blood calls to blood. However, of course, Leah doesn't just prick her finger and use a drop. Instead, she opens her wrist with this blade. I want to be very careful with how I talk about this. I definitely don't want to get demonetized or flagged, because you know how YouTube is. She then bleeds into the bowl of milk and herbs, and she bleeds a lot. That's completely unnecessary. Also extremely unsanitary.
Girl.
One, use some hand sanitizer and just prick your finger with a diabetic pen and call it a day. And then, throw away that disposable pricker and then, girl, okay, use some hand sanitizer. Like, come on. I'm also not going to sit here and say that there are no instances where using a ceremonial blade to actually draw blood might not be warranted, but I guarantee you she didn't have to do all that. Once she does that, she decides to then add her mother's hair into the bowl of the milk, herbs, and blood. She makes another call out to Pyewacket and then decides to bury it in the ground under the star that she carved in the dirt. I will say that as someone who is in a neo-traditional witches coven and who studies American traditional witchcraft, this scene was very much giving me real world witchery, okay? Not the shooting flames out of your fingers and, crazy Harry Potter nonsense, but real, actual witchery. This is what it looks like, okay? It's messy, it's ugly, often. After that, the girl basically packs up all her shit and is clearly pretty proud of herself, but soon finds herself to be lost in these woods, even though it seems like she knew where she was going when she got there. Of course, leaving the ritual, now that the spirit has been evoked, things are definitely different, and you can tell by the way that they film it that the ritual worked. Also, because our beloved girl, Leah, decided to shed so much blood, she's lightheaded and she's confused. The thing that she conjured did indeed come, and she senses it. It's clearly following her, but it's remaining hidden just out of view. If you're paying attention during this part in the movie, you can see that there is something following her, sort of hiding just out of view and running between the tree trunks, following her home. I personally saw it move between the trees, and that was probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Also, again, she did no divination prior to making this spirit pact, which is a rookie mistake, sis. If you are going to pact with a demon or summon a spirit, you should always do your research and do your proper divination beforehand to ensure that the results that you get from the work are indeed what you intend. However, she did not do that. This is very much what I like to call reactionary magic, where in the heat of the moment, she grabbed whatever she had on hand and she channeled her hurt and her rage and her sadness into the work, and she was blinded by it. I think many of us witches have been there before. So I do want to point out, I'm not shaming her for that, because girl, I've been there too, but there's a reason why they say always do your divination. Read those runes, pull those cards, throw those bones, do a little something. She gets back to her house eventually, and you can just tell that part of her really regrets what she has done, and she's clearly kind of also afraid of the magic that she just used and how fast it's working. My thing here is girl, if you're gonna talk the walk and walk the talk, really be about it. You knew good and well what you intended to go out into those woods and do. You decided in the heat of the moment that you were going to make a spirit pact to unalive your mother. And then when that magic actually works and you're starting to see signs that the spirit is active, you're scared and you're regretting it. Like, girl, where was that beforehand? Okay. Like, this is something that I feel like I see often in witchery, is like, there's a lot of witches who want to talk a big game and pull out railroad spikes and graveyard dirt and coffin boxes, and they're a death worker and they're a this and they're a that. When they do the work, they're afraid of the work. Like, make that make sense. This is witchcraft. Witchcraft has teeth. Witchcraft has claws. You know, there's also a saying that goes like, the scariest thing in those woods as a witch should be you. So this is not the path of love and light. This is not the path to be coddled and comforted. Like, witchcraft can be ugly, like I've said, and hard. So if that's not your bag, baby, then you need to step away from the cauldron. Later, she's having dinner with her mother, and like, as she's cutting into the steak, her wound from the ritual opens up and starts bleeding. Of course, her mother is like startled at the fact that her daughter's arm is bleeding pretty profusely and rushes her into the bathroom to clean her wound. And then you can tell again that Leah is really regretting the work that she just wove upon her own mother. I also want to point out, when it comes to Malefica, okay, which is what some folks call black magic, but that's kind of an outdated term. Let's really say what we mean here, and let's talk about offensive magic, Malefica. It's typically frowned upon to weave against your own bloodline. There are so many other things in the craft that you can do to bind or to banish someone who is harming you without going 0 to 60 straight to unaliving them. And there is a common belief in the craft that when it comes to your red soul, when it comes to your ancestral connection, there's a blood tie there. So magic that you weave upon your bloodline is still going to create a ripple effect and affect you. And that has nothing to do with the rule of 3. That's just common sense. Also, magic does create ripple effects. I, for one, don't necessarily believe that there's some grand divine punisher for every spell that you weave, but if you throw a rock into a pond, it's going to make ripples. If you are a teenager hexing your single mother who provides for you and holds it down and feeds you and keeps a roof over your head, and without her you would essentially be homeless, that's just not smart thinking, right? But keep in mind, Leah is an impulsive and angsty teenager. I know that for myself, someone who has worked as a card reader, card slinger, and a witch for the better half of a decade now, there are people out there who are living with their roommate that they depend upon to pay their rent, but yet they're trying to put their roommate in a coffin box. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Or there are people out there who are so blinded by their hurt. That's genuine, that's real, but they're so blinded by it that they can't see the forest for the trees. So back to the movie, Leah basically ends up having a lot of sleepless nights. She becomes like afraid of the dark, which, girl, what are you doing here? Again, if you're about it, be about it. Like, you wanted to be a witch and do witch shit, and now witch shit is happening. Like, what? She's afraid of the dark. She can't sleep. When she is sleeping, she's having horrible nightmares. And then she starts hearing clawing and thumping on the roof of the house. I do just want to say the house that her mother bought is stunning. Like, what a millennial dream to move out to the countryside and buy a house like that. One night, she's not able to sleep and she's constantly being woken up by thuds and thumps, and she runs downstairs to make sure that the front door is locked, which I thought was kind of odd, but also kind of foreshadowing what's to come. And of course, the next morning, the front door had been opened and there was very clearly dirt brought into the house, kind of suggesting that Pyewacket is now in the house. Girl, the call is coming from in the house. Of course, Leah was completely gagged and completely shook, which again, I'm like, why, girl? Because you did the ritual, you felt it following you home from the woods, you've heard it on the roof of your house for several nights now. Like, did you forget your intention? Did you forget what you wished to happen? Later in the film, her and her mother end up going to an antique store. Love antique stores, by the way, and this one was definitely witchy. There was lots of little goodies around the antique store, and it looked to me like it was probably around Halloween because there was a lot of like fall seasonal decor around the antique store. And she comes across this poster in the antique store that says, "Be careful what you wish for. Someone might be listening." Okay, so this is editing jazz here again, but also can we peep the fact there's some Black Phillip, some Goat of Mendes, some Witch's Devil imagery also in this as well? Can we just acknowledge that? Did y'all catch that? Which of course throws Leah off, and then she gets really on edge and she starts getting the ookie spookies, like, you know, the Pyewacket is near. And to me, I feel like that's a major message of this whole movie. Like, don't summon what you can't banish type thing, like, which is a pretty common phrase in the craft in general. Again, don't write a check with your mouth that your wallet can't cash. Don't summon spirits you don't know how to banish. Also, I would say don't summon spirits, period, if you don't know anything about them and you just read them about them once in a book. When they're leaving the antique store, they end up getting into a car accident, which you just know is going to happen as soon as it cuts to them driving in the car. The way that this is filmed, it's a beautiful movie. I think so, but it is quite predictable. They're fine. They somehow miraculously are completely unscratched. I think their car is mostly okay, but they do end up needing a tow to come collect them. Later that night, of course, Leah in her sleep is woken up because she hears thumping on the rooftop again, and she's super freaked out. She's getting the ookie spookies that Pyewacket is near. So something kind of odd about Leah's bedroom is that there is a door to the attic basically right above where her bed is, kind of like over by where her nightstand is, which architecturally is just like, that's weird that you would put your bed right there, but that's me. Also, the attic is like really cool because it's mostly finished. So like, if I was a teenage girl and I had access to like a second bedroom, basically, that was just up some stairs, like I would have totally turned that into like my witchy den. She ends up waking her mom up and she's like, you need to come check this out. I'm freaked out. Like, I hear something in the attic. There's someone in the house. And of course the mom gets up to go check it out. And she's like, there's nothing here. Also, like, Leah, girl, come on. You know what's going on. Also, why would you send your mother up into the attic if you regret doing that work on her? If you know that that spirit is in the attic, why would you send your mother up there to go up and check it out? At this point in the movie, I really thought the mother was gonna like fall off the stairs that come when you pull the attic door down, right? There's those stairs. I really thought that the mother was just going to like fall and break her neck or something, but that does not happen. Then on another night, Pyewacket starts climbing out of the walls and ends up crawling like an animal over to where the girl is sleeping and ends up standing over her and is like watching her sleep. Also, the way that the Pyewacket is portrayed in this scene, it kind of gives me like Ifrit, Jinnik vibes, or like a shadow person. The spirit is able to move through walls and is sort of void shadow figure-like. So going back to her evocation, where she basically gave the spirit full permission to possess her and see with her eyes and speak with her tongue and hear with her ears, I really felt like they filmed this to kind of show that the Pyewacket was going to body jump Leah in her sleep, which is also known as riding, where a spirit possesses a practitioner. But that's not really the direction that they chose to go in. I also kind of thought that if the Pyewacket did body jump Leah, then while Leah is possessed by the Pyewacket, Leah would then unalive her mother, and like that's how the Pyewacket was going to fulfill Leah's pact request. That it wasn't going to be like a spirit attacking the flesh, it was going to be a spirit possessing flesh to then attack the flesh, if that makes sense. After that night where the Pyewacket stands over her bed and watches her sleep, she ends up waking up in the woods. And that's also kind of why I was like, oh, did she just end up unaliving her mother? And is the blood all over Leah her mother's blood? But no, that's not what it is. It's more like she ended up sleepwalking out there or something. And the spot on her arm where she fed the spirit with blood is now open again and all muddy and bloody, like the spirit fed on her. Which this to me is kind of a reference in some Tradcraft folklore, because there is records of witches feeding their familiars, almost like breastfeeding but with blood. Of course, she wakes up and she's like completely terrified and she's like running home barefoot. Ends up getting to the bathroom and she starts washing her hands. Like the camera cuts to a scene where she's scrubbing the blood off of her hands, which to me symbolically is kind of this reference to Leah having blood on her hands, as in like it's a reference symbolically of Leah's guilt. Later, Leah ends up meeting up with her friends and they get into like a fight, and some of them don't believe Leah at all and think that Leah is like making this up for attention. Another one of her friends is like really interested and is like, can I come sleep over and can I come see what's going on at the house? Like, I believe you. That friend was Janice. In this scene where she's talking with her friends, she does admit that she feels bad that she did this ritual, and that she feels terrible, while one of the other friends in the group is basically like, you're sick, I can't believe you actually tried to use magic to unalive your own mother, which like felt. And then Janice, the girl with the black lipstick and the purple hair extensions, is like, girl, I get it. Like, I'm gonna come sleep over and we're gonna figure this out. I do want to take a little pause here to talk about mental health and magic. I think I would like to make a proper video really dedicating more to this topic, but the thing about magic is it's not going to fix mental health afflictions. Please seek therapy. Please take care of yourself. Please seek professional help when needed. And I have seen practitioners lose their sanity to the craft. The girls end up having a sleepover, and of course they end up
Smoking a little weed?
because of course they do. And they sneak out into the woods at night because of course they do. Also, like, have y'all not heard all of Appalachian TikTok basically telling you if you hear something out in the woods, no you didn't. If you see something in the woods, no you didn't. And when the sun goes down, you should just come on home and get out of the woods. There's a reason why so many cultures have these superstitions. I don't think that this is actually supposed to take place in Appalachia. I think this is Canada. So they end up going out to the ritual space out in the woods using their phone flashlights, and Janice ends up playing a prank on Leah, basically pretending to be possessed by the Pyewacket, which she isn't, and it's just a very ill-mannered, untimely sort of joke, because clearly Leah is like very not okay with what is going on, and is truly being afflicted by something, and her bestie Janice is just kind of making a joke about it. So now there's some weird friction between the two girls. Janice ends up going to sleep on the couch, and she wakes up in the middle of the night to the ooky spooky sort of shadowy figure of the Pyewacket over her. The next morning, Leah is woken up by her mother telling her that Janice is nowhere to be found. They end up looking all over the property for Janice until they find her in the back seat of her mother's car, completely shaken up and demanding that Leah's mother take her home immediately. She's clearly not okay. She clearly experienced something at that sleepover overnight when she woke up to the Pyewacket over her. And then later, her mom ends up agreeing to take Janice home. And we're just supposed to believe that Janice gets home safe and sound, I guess. But then like later, when Leah goes to school, Janice is not at school for several days. And she's also ignoring all of Leah's text messages. And Leah's like, girl, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And there's nothing to be heard from Janice until Leah's mother basically informs her that Janice has been really sick and hasn't been able to get out of bed for several days. So Leah's mother heard from Janice's parents. So spirit sickness is a thing. I think that the movie here is basically suggesting that the Pyewacket caused some sort of illness to befall upon Janice because Janice, A, mocked the spirit, which is not something to play with, and also B, Janice was kind of trying to interfere and was trying to help Leah undo the ritual that she had done, the spirit pacting that she had done. And the Pyewacket, per the pact, the Pyewacket's whole mission is to fulfill the request that was made in that ritual, which was to unalive Leah's mother. So any person that stands in the way of that then becomes at risk of falling victim to the spirit. This is very traditional witchcraft. Later in the movie, Leah ends up looking up the author of the book, The Occult Primer, that she got signed, and ends up finding a way to contact him online. She sends him an email requesting for his help, and he ends up getting back to her pretty quickly. They set up a phone meeting the next day, and he explains to her that the dark spirit Pyewack is super manipulative and also will shapeshift and take on different forms. The author tells Leah about the river metaphor, bridging the gap between worlds. This metaphor essentially suggests that the other world, the underworld, and the midworld are all separated but connected. And when we make contact with the dead or with otherworldly spirits, we are bridging the gap. We are sort of bringing them across the river into the midworld, and that can't easily be undone. The author tells Leah that once Pyewacket fulfills her request to unalive her mother, Pyewacket will then also fulfill that same request upon the caster. Which, like, Leah, how did you not read this in the book? Like, girl, Miss Ma'am, honey child. The author also sort of perpetuates some stereotypical views of Malefica and tells Leah that when it comes to black magic, it'll start and end with you. It's just like so cringe because oftentimes when witches are genuinely casting Malefica, it could oftentimes be used for justice workings or rightful revenge. I fully believe as a practitioner that we have the right to defend ourselves. If you were to break into my home, you might be met with a little something. So why is magic any different? Also, this is just a spirit conjuration gone south due to improper research on Leah's part and her just being impulsive and reactionary. This is not how most spirit packs actually go. Of course, because this is for entertainment purposes. So of course it needs to be dramatic and, you know, crazy and worst case scenario because this is a movie. But again, other people outside of the craft will see this and will just naively assume that this is how it always is in the craft, and that is not the case. The author tells Leah that in order to reverse the working and prevent harm from being done, Leah basically needs to do the exact same ritual, but backwards, making sure that she includes all of the items that she used in the ritual in the exact same order, but by doing everything in reverse, which is also a pretty traditional witchcraft aspect. I mean, doing things backwards, even saying an evocation backwards or a chant backwards is called oculum, or like mirrored, where you're sort of using like time magic to undo what was done. Also, by walking backwards and doing things in reverse, you're sort of beguiling or tricking the nature spirits and throwing them off course. There's a lot of lore around walking backwards out of a cemetery, walking backwards out of the woods. The author also tells Leah that Pyewacket is a trickster and a shapeshifter, and that she can't trust everything that she sees or hears because Pyewacket is a shapeshifter and will use various visages and forms to try to throw her off course. Again, I don't know why Pyewacket is like working against the witch when in fact Pyewacket was a documented witch's familiar, which means that Pyewacket, Vinegar Tom, Jamara, these are our allies. But of course, again, this is for entertainment, so of course it has to be evil and wicked and crazy. She then rushes back to the wooded area where she did the ritual to do it all over again, but backwards. And meanwhile, she hears her mom calling out to her to come to her while she's trying to reverse the ritual. So that kind of plays into some Tradcraft lore of like there being mimics or spirits that will use the voice of your loved ones to trick you. That's a real thing. Also, while she's trying to reverse the ritual, she stumbles across the corpse of her mother that just seemingly appears out of the earth. She's completely thrown off by this and then proceeds to call 911. She's on the phone with the dispatcher. She ends up kind of being thrown off course because the dispatcher's voice takes on an otherworldly cadence, and she feels like this is Pyewacket on the phone talking to her through the dispatcher. Again, remember, she did give Pyewacket full permission to possess her tongue, ears, and eyes. No, baby. No. Baby, you don't do that on a first date with a spirit. She hangs up with the police dispatcher and she ends up calling her crush and is like, can you please come up here? I'm really freaked out. I need you up here. He's like, I don't know if I can come up there until later. And she's like, please come up here. Meanwhile, the corpse of her mother laying on the ground starts to animate. So then some time passes where she's like having a meltdown in the woods, clutching her athame, and she gets a text message from her boyfriend saying, hey, I'm here, come out front, which she does only to end up getting there and not seeing his car and realizing this is another trick by Pyewacket. She looks at her phone and sees that actually she never got the text from him like she thought. And she looks up at the house and sees her mother standing in the window, but it's clearly not her mother. Pyewacket, who is presenting as her mother, then comes out of the house and uses magic to compel her, meaning to force her into the home, telling her, why don't you come have a seat, Leah? Why do you have that dagger, Leah? What were you going to do with that? And just the way that the spirit is talking through the visage of her mother, you can tell that's Pyewacket. I'll say, as a witch and as a viewer, it was kind of confusing during that scene where she's trying to reverse the ritual and she sees her mother's corpse with her eyes, but then she also hears her mother's voice calling her. But again, in this movie, the spirit of Pyewacket is supposed to be a trickster. So as a viewer, like at this time, we're not really sure what's real and what's not real. So I think that the producers made sure that that was really demonstrated very well. Again, the cinematography in this movie is great. Leah ends up running from her mother in the house and she barricades herself up in the attic, which like, why are we always running up when it comes to something? And of course, the Pyewacket as her mother follows her up there slowly, suspensefully, and dramatically, and Leah barricades the door with a chair, and the Pyewacket, possessing her mother's corpse, is trying to open the door, and it's super, super creepy. It's a really wild scene, and the Pyewacket ends up bursting through the door as her true form, not in the form of her mother. It's a horrific scene, a great moment in the movie. When this happens, Leah takes a lamp and smashes a window and basically jumps out of it. And the Pyewacket then begins to follow her. And Leah like runs into the woods, which like, girl, I don't know where you think you're going. You're 2 hours away from civilization and it's nighttime and you're running into the woods where you met the Pyewacket, but I don't know. I don't know what else you do in that situation, right? And she sees the Pyewacket hop out of the window, hop onto the roof, hop onto the ground, get on all four legs, and run after her like a dog. It's a wicked scene. Leah then runs back into the house, runs upstairs, and locks herself up in the attic that's like above her bed. Again, why are we running up? I was a little bit confused on why the Pyewacket didn't just walk through the walls. Like when Leah had barricaded the door, I'm not sure if that's because the Pyewacket had become more fleshly and not as shadow form like. And so maybe because the spirit was more flesh and bone, it wasn't able to just walk through walls like it could when it was more astral. But I thought that that was interesting. Like the Pyewacket had no issue just literally walking through walls earlier in the movie, but now is stopped by a chair barricading a door. Like that's just kind of weird. Camera also then like basically showcases that it's currently a full moon, which I feel like is a subtle nod to more traditional witchery in the sense that when the moon is full, it is thought to be a heightened time for witches and spirits. So Leah's like locked herself up in the attic and she's pushed some boxes over the attic door. And she's got like her athame and she's like crying and shaking and hiding. And then basically like her mother like comes up there and it's actually her mother. Now her mother was never dead to begin with. And that was another trick from Pyewacket. And her mother is clearly concerned about her mentally unwell daughter who's hysterically crying and who clearly has lost any sense of sanity. And she's like begging Leah to like come up out of the attic and to like coax her out and is really trying to comfort her. And Leah is like completely freaking out and is convinced that this is still the Pyewacket. So then later, while her mother is sleeping, it cuts to a scene where Leah basically siphons all of the gas out of her mother's car into a bucket, takes it up into her mother's room and wakes her mother up. Her mother is, of course, naturally terrified to see her daughter standing at the foot of her bed in the middle of the night and is like, Leah, are you okay? And she throws all of the gas that she siphoned out of her mother's car onto her and lights it up. Really horrific scene where her mother basically ends up burning alive, as well as the house. Leah almost ends up dying in the fire and jumps out of a window around the same time that her boyfriend actually pulls up to the house. After that, it cuts to a police interrogation. So we're just supposed to assume that the boyfriend picked up Leah from the ground and brought her to the hospital, and then Leah was detained by the police, and then she's then being interrogated by the police. And the police are telling her, we got your call to the police dispatch where you said that your mother was unalived in the woods, but we did not find her body in the woods. We found it charred in the house. And they're trying to interrogate Leah because they assume that Leah is guilty of the crime of committing arson and also unaliving her mother. The movie just ends there. And so we're kind of left with, did Leah get possessed by the Pyewacket to actually unalive her mother? Like, was that it the whole time? Was her mother actually deceased and the Pyewacket just animated her corpse and then later Leah like lit it on fire? Like, the ending is not super clear. Also, Leah does not confess in the ending. She's just completely shaken and you can tell that she's clearly psychologically damaged. And I also feel like they kind of set this movie up for like a second one. However, since this came out in 2018, I don't know if that's gonna happen. As far as the good goes about this movie, I think that they did get a good amount of traditional witchcraft stuff pretty accurate. I really enjoyed the cinematography and I found that the mother-daughter relationship was very real and even relatable in some parts for me. So the house in the woods, absolutely beautiful. When it comes to the bad, I would say that this movie kind of starts off as like a slow burn, but then like the last 20 minutes of the movie is rushed. And I feel like this movie could have really benefited a lot by having like maybe an extra 20 or 30 minutes added on to just really flesh out that ending, because you're left with feeling kind of just like, what the hell did I just watch? Because it's such a slow burn up until it isn't. I would have also liked to hear more about her father. Like, was her father also an occultist? What got Leah into this? Also, what the hell happened to Janice? Like, she's just in the movie and then just kind of disappears and we're just told that she's sick and that's the end of it. I feel like they could have explored that a lot more. Had some tension with Janice and her about Janice being like totally freaked out by Leah and the magic that she conjured, or they could have showed Janice like in the hospital, or they could have had Janice's funeral, or just something to wrap up that bit of the plot. Overall, I would probably give this movie an 8 out of 10. I think that if you're like a horror fan, you'll like it. I think if you're a folk horror fan, you'll like it. I think that if you're into nitty-gritty traditional witchcraft, you'll enjoy it. Like if you liked the movie The Witch, or the 2018 Suspiria, or The Craft, I think that you'll like this movie. Feel free to check out all of my links down below. Again, if you'd like to learn more about Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General, or if you want to check out some other reviews from content creators that have talked about this video, I have linked them all down below with some other educational resources. Please let me know if you have enjoyed this video. Make sure to like it if you like it, and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss when I upload. If you would like to see more videos in this style, doing a deep dive from a real witch's perspective on folk horror and occult and witchy movies, let me know, and let me know if you have any suggestions. Until next time, blessed be, and I will see you in hell.
Crooked finger bent with intent, sending confusion and chaos where meant. Evils arise and powers imbue, do unto others as they've done to you. Call back the storm in the heart of a witch who's already been scorned. The demons whisper.